you. So I can't support this bill as it is currently written. When healthcare sharing ministries first began, I think they were a good thing, and actually agree with the representative across the way on that. They allowed religious folks to share resources, help one another with medical expenses, and pray for one another. And many of the participants actually had health insurance besides this. If those original ministries were the only type of health ministries included in this bill, I would happily support it. But what happened is that over time, some commercial interests saw this as an opportunity to sell an insurance-like product while evading insurance regulations. They expanded so that they're no longer just these religious ministries, but companies, often with no religious or ministerial connection, who sell these unregulated insurance-like products to consumers for a profit. Many consumers are attracted by the cost, which can be less than insurance, but that's because these plans often don't cover pre-existing conditions, they contain numerous exclusions, and most important, the company has no legal obligation to pay any claim they don't wish to pay. Coverage is usually strictly voluntary by the company. And this has resulted in a number of lawsuits alleging fraud and other wrongdoing. And to make matters worse, those lawsuits are sometimes met with a clause in the plan which requires that you can't sue, but have to go to arbitrate in some other state. So as written, this bill would write into law these unregulated insurance-like products of all types. My hope is to preserve the original intent of these health sharing ministries while protecting consumers against those who see these insurance-like products as a way to unfairly profit off of consumers by looking like insurance while evading insurance regulation. And that's why, Mr. Chair, I move that Senate Bill 149 be amended and request that Amendment SB149 004002 be posted and deemed read.
So ordered. Representative Staffman.
Thank you. So what this amendment does, Mr. Chair, members of the body, is three things. The first thing says that these health-caring ministries have to spend 80% of the monies they take in on medical expenses for their for the people who are part of the plan. And that 80% is the same number that the ACA requires for insurance companies. What we've seen in some of the lawsuits I referenced is that they take much more than that. It's not just the cream that's at stake here. It's the cream and the milk that they take. In some cases, some of these places are fabulous, but that's just how it works. So that's the first change. The first part of the amendment would be to impose this 80% of monies collected to go towards actual health expenses. The second part is to prohibit them from using arbitration clauses, forcing a member to travel to North Carolina or Virginia if they have a dispute. That is the law with respect to insurance policies, and it should also apply to these healthcare sharing ministries. And the third thing is simply the enforcement of the first two. And what it requires is that each year, these healthcare sharing ministries would be required to file with the Department of Insurance proof that they're in fact that 80% is going to healthcare costs, and that they're not using arbitration. And that's, if you look at the amendment on the back page, section 6. And finally, it amends section 33-1-311, which is the powers of the insurance commissioner, just by adding to those powers what's in section 4B. It simply says that they have the authority to accept these and to determine whether they're subject to regulation under the statute. If the healthcare sharing ministry fails to comply with these two basic obligations, our insurance commissioner can declare them to be insurance and regulate them fully as if they're insurance. So that's the amendment I would propose that I think both preserves the great intent behind these things and prevents the consumer fraud that sometimes happens because it's an unregulated product. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. I imagine the good speaker is about to do the chair's job for me. Further discussion on the amendment, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I won't speak to the intent of the amendment, but I will tell you what this amendment will do to this bill. We have a deadline for these bills tomorrow. With the way everything has to go, if this amendment gets put on, we have to skip a day. So in theory, this amendment will kill this bill. So I'm asking for a vote red on this amendment and a green on the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There being no further discussion on the amendment, does the amendment sponsor wish to close?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think, first of all, I could say I was unaware of that as a freshman. Sometimes the machinations of these deadlines are not so apparent. My intent was not to kill the bill, but to make it better. If we can't make it better, I think we need to kill this bill because it's a hazard for innocent consumers. I can say that at committee, when we heard this bill, one person after another came in and said, I got this instead of insurance because it was much cheaper. And although they say they're not insurance, that's not what the consumer thinks. And they have no idea that when they get sick, they may or may not have their bills covered. And there's not much they can do about it if they don't. Without this amendment, it's a bad bill. I wish it had gotten here earlier so we had an opportunity for this. But I'll be yes on the amendment and no on the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative.